John Wooden, one of the best coaches in NCAA history, has a story where when people would join the basketball team, he said, cool, we're going to learn to tie our shoes. And people are like, what do you mean? I know how to tie my shoes. I'm not 3. The point was that shoes that were loose, or people, if they didn't tie their shoes properly, well, that would cause blisters. Blisters cause sore feet cause lost games cause lost championships. And so that's the analog for this idea of memos, is without good documentation, if we don't teach people how to write good memos, teach our team, teach each other, and communicate this, like the importance of writing good memos and good documentation, that becomes the lost championships in the long run. If you throw a bunch of words onto a page and there is no formatting, you're writing a book, there are no chapter headings, there's no coherence as far as where paragraphs start and end, and it's just a bunch of thoughts put down. It's the same thing with a memo. If you just dump the words in, our brains are not very good at deciphering between information if you don't chunk it out. And so by saying overview, people know, okay, this is probably a bunch of macro points about the micro details in this doc. If you say background, people are probably going to know that has to do with like what led up to the impetus for that document. If it says action items, same thing. You probably know there's action to be taken or next steps. And so formatting makes a very big difference as far as the way, not just the logic and the way the information is presented, but the way that it aesthetically looks really helps people to go through things a lot quicker. So that's probably one of the biggest buckets. Is it doesn't mean that it should be perfect and polished. It just means that it should be consistent, which is a very big difference. We have a master database of memos where there is taxonomy with type and tagging and all these things of being able to filter accordingly. But that's not what makes it successful, is just pointing everybody to that one place and say, here's where everything lives. What you want to do is take those things that are memos and link them in other wikis. So you want to have other wikis where you would link a doc, or other pages where you would link a doc. And a great doc might be linked 20 or more times across different documents. The alternative is the failure mode. So what's the failure mode? Is pages within pages within pages. Because the only opportunity for discovering, if you've got a memo and then you create a native page within that memo, and that native page has a native page, the only way somebody could ever discover that is serendipitously through search. Otherwise, assume that if it's not backlinked, it will very easily get lost, and there could be super important information. And the hard thing is that you actually don't know what is going to be important information for the next person who comes on board, because they discover that and they go, wow, you were looking at this in completely the wrong light. Here's the right way to look at it. Or it helps them learn something new about levels or whatever it is. So you're always trying to create these wiki rabbit holes for people to go down. One of the things that we do is backlinking document after document after document where necessary. And the idea is to have all these reference docs. It's so that if people externally read the new content memo or a new team member comes on board, they always have context for how we've got to certain points. And so the more that you link, it's no different than Wiki. The best Wikipedia pages have so many linked resources to other pages that you can go as deep down a rabbit hole as you want for self-education and discovery.
Yep. The wiki structure plays into the memos database. The memos database is kind of like the center of the brain. But then there are links to it from all the different places that matter. All of our memos are cross functions, and teams live in one memos database. It's not like we have separate databases for each specific team. So that helps enforce some of the standardization and makes it clear that this is the one place where these live, and they follow some sort of norm around structure, format, taxonomy, metadata, and then the actual page itself. And what's helpful here is that these are all shared and visible to, in most cases, almost everyone on the team. And so some of these can spur different ideas and kind of get some cross-pollination when people see them. For example, on an exploration doc, to add their own thoughts to it and kind of mature the topic. And then it's evergreen. It can be referenced later on. If someone gets hired in a year from now and they decide to pick up this whole area, they can see what research has been done before and pull up a ton of work that's already been done on this. And so there's a really good kind of institutional memory that gets preserved when these kinds of documents that otherwise might be in someone's notepad if they were just researching something get preserved in kind of the company record.
If a document, assume it was a strategy document and it was a functional area that you and I, using us as examples, you and I might not be close to day to day. That's like engineering. And it was a 20,000 word memo. Well, for us to go through that and really digest it and understand it, the more helpful thing is to get the informal take from Andrew of him walking through with a loom and it doesn't matter if it was 15 minutes walking through the doc, but usually these are on the order of 5 to 10 minutes will be a recap of the doc. But when you watch that, you go, great, I understand the high level takeaways. I understand the reason for this memo. I understand the necessary information that I need to understand just to have a pulse on what's happening in that function of the company. You might go through and read the memo after and you're skimming it, but that gives you enough of a foundation that you don't need to sit there and think about what each one of the sections means. So the reason for putting the TLDR and the loom is to help anybody else. It's not necessarily just to say, cool, I did this for the sake of it. It's actually probably one of the most important things of memos is having the upfront. What do you have in the US? Not Cole's notes. What are those things?
Cliff notes?
Cliff's notes. Ours were called Cole's notes. Cliff's notes. The Cliff's notes is the way to go. Talking about flow, though, there is a flow to memos which does help, and it's fairly basic. TLDR, background overview if necessary, presenting the body, presenting the takeaways, and the action items. Have reference docs at the end. That's pretty much it. With that, if you flow information that way, it follows the logic that people can walk through and understand what's being communicated.
Yep. One of my favorite sections that I've seen us add that is unique from other places I've seen is a dedicated discussion section at the bottom. Might be jumping ahead here, but that usually goes at the bottom. And that's a place for all the readers to add their thoughts and questions in response to the content itself. What's interesting about this is that generally you see this happen in comments. So if you're using Google Docs or Notion, you can highlight any specific phrase or clause and then add an inline comment specifically on that point, which is really helpful because it points exactly to the point that's being discussed. But the discussion section is a little bit more broad to react to the document as a whole and to have a longer form thought in response beyond a sentence or two about a specific sentence or a specific idea, leaves room for some longer discussion to happen. And so that's been something that I saw early on in our docs. And I think keeping that tradition alive is really helpful because it encourages people to react more thoroughly and think through their thoughts and reactions and document them there in the moment and kind of memorialize the conversation that then happens, which can't get resolved the way a comment does when you fix the typo or address the idea directly, right? This is the record of how this came to be and what edits might have been made along the way. So that's a section that is worth calling out that I think adds a ton of value.
The easy thing to do is go, great, I've got so many other things going on. How can I possibly manage this? Like my human brain is inefficient. What can I do? And that gets to this idea of using tooling where possible. So relying on tooling. So you don't need to remember. You don't want to remember, oh my goodness, I have to follow up on that and I have to do that. Everyone's going to have a different process for managing their workload, but there are certain things that can be done to follow up on things rigorously. And that's using toolings with things in Notion like reminders. So you @remind date, tag yourself in an action item. And even if the follow-up is just setting the reminder for a future date because you're not ready to address it, great. It also might be, yeah, there it is. I can close that. And then you know to change the status to yes, they're complete. You can use the same thing with reminders in Superhuman, in Threads, but in general, in calendaring, you can set, like, everyone again is going to have their own prioritization and task management. But this idea of using reminders and tooling so that your imperfect brain can not have to rely on itself, because if we all use our brains, we're going to fail miserably because we're human beings.
Yeah, there's too much to keep up with, keeping it all top of mind. And so the reminders features work well. I think a lot of these have built-in features for that. Notion's pretty good about letting us mention a date and setting an alarm on it. And like you said, SuperView does the same, as does Notion, as does calendaring, as does a to-do list with a date set to the future. So plenty of ways to do that, but that level of consistency and follow-through is what makes all the difference. In terms of keeping docs alive, I think action items is a good one to touch on. And so that's one of the sections in there. And that's a way that we keep referring back to a doc and actually make sure that the action items that were outlined in the document itself get addressed towards the end. Something that we noticed and that we added a field for recently was it's very easy to lose action items within a memo itself and not reference back again in the future. So we added a universal action items complete field to the memo itself and have a binary yes or no. And so we can filter on a no and see all memos from many months ago that might still have actions required. And that's been a cool little tweak that we made to the process that's helped quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And the idea of not having action items complete isn't a failure mode. It is a status. And so no is completely fine. If you write a memo last week, it might be no for 3 months, and that's great. It's that when it turns to yes, that's the nod to the rest of the team to go, this thing was closed out. It still could be a relevant doc, but like, this project is complete. We don't need to guess whether or not there are outstanding action items. That gives assurance. It's back to this foundation of trust. You build that trust by having the plan, communicating the plan, closing the loop, and then go make a new plan.